Let's speak to our resident analyst, Angelo Fick, for a bit of analysis here. Angelo, welcome. I must ask you, first of all, the wording of the report is very interesting, and this has come up in previous analysis. Is this allegation of corruption something that Thuli Madonsela is alluding to in this report without saying, yes, I have proof of this? Or she's simply saying, this is what it appears like on the surface, and this needs to be investigated in a lot more detail for us to come up with a definitive finding?
It would be the second option because, as she's indicated, several of her queries were not followed up on. Several of her requests for interaction with particularly the President himself were either never answered or they were then rebuffed in the end. And the timeline from March and May 2016 to October 2016 is quite revealing. And as Karen's pointed out, what's really of concern is that all of those embattled and constantly bailed out state-owned enterprises that have now been buffeted between control and oversight by the Deputy President to control and oversight by a presidential commission itself, which has cost South African taxpayers over the last 2 decades in the billions, are at the centre of this. Eskom, the energy monopoly, is crucially implicated in deals with a particular subsection of the Oak Bay companies. And then what Thuli Madonsela's report and investigation wants to unearth and reveal is precisely how family connections, but also overlap in the role players, and then most importantly, the lack of meeting the policy requirements by the board and by the civil servants who are responsible for the board, and those are those ministers. The minister in charge then was Lynn Brown, and in a different moment, the way in which other companies, for example, in relation to SAA, that deeply compromised national carrier, is also implicated in its deals with a different set of companies inside the Oak Bay family, with the New Age. And so the queries are, these are companies that South African taxpayers have had to bail out. These are companies that are also essential to, particularly for Eskom and Transnet, to the South African Infrastructure Development Plan questions, the sale of coal, the export and import of coal. So here are crucial questions of not just were these improper relations, but what have been the knock-on effects and consequences for the stability of the South African state, its economy, and the way in which ordinary citizens get to live in this state that says it has goals for 2030.
Angelo, we've heard a number of calls for the President to resign, both as ANC leader and as the President of the country. But given what we've been told today and the Commission of Inquiry that's been recommended, has this bought him time? Is it still a legitimate call for him to step down immediately?
Well, he can step down whenever he feels like it, and that, I think, is the Secretary General's statement. It's his conscience. But the most damning line for me in the report is that the President has to, appoint a Commission of Inquiry, but he does not get to appoint the person who heads it. The Chief Justice has to do that, precisely because he is so deeply implicated, as Karen Moore has outlined. And that tells us that this is a man who cannot, again, be judge and jury of his own faults. He has to find somebody like Mogoeng, who then has to give him one name, says the report, only one name, which will lead that inquiry and then come back. And whether he resigns now or whether he resigns at the end of that process, when far more damning details will come out about his family's relationship with the families that were implicated in the compromising decisions made by, one, members of his cabinet, and two, the SOEs that are supposed to, as the report points out repeatedly, hold the interests of South Africa and of South Africans primary, beyond and above everything else. That, I think, is the conundrum that confronts President Jacob Zuma, the President of the Republic of South Africa, and Mr. Jacob Zuma, the private citizen, who has to account for all of these things that have his name on them.
Angela, this leaves us with a dilemma. I mean, we've got a list of people from the President downwards who are implicated in this report. Under normal circumstances, they would be suspended. What happens to people who are under this level of suspicion? Well,
the duty is on their party, the party that put them in power, to behave in a particular way. Now, we've had a year in which the legislature was reminded of its absolutely constitutionally required duty to hold the executive to account. The ball now rests with Parliament. All of those MPs in Parliament, whether they are members of A party or B party or C party, have a duty because they swore an oath of office. And they must remember what the Constitutional Court found, that the legislature neglected its constitutional duty on a previous occasion in holding the executive to account. Given this information, certainly innocent until proven guilty. The investigation must continue, but they cannot continue to protect a man who's implicated in this sort of situation. We have had governments, and we've had a government in this country fall before as a result of the information scandal, the apartheid government of the late 1970s. We've had the Spanish government fall as a result of its complicated relationships with corporations and corruption. The question is, can South African members of parliament respond to their constitutionally mandated duty and hold the executive to account? Because the independent administrative oversight body has responded, the judiciary will respond in due course as they have today, and now the onus is up to those elected by the people to do the duty that Mogoeng and the entire Constitutional Court's full bench reminded them of in 2016.
We wait to hear from them. Thank you very much for that analysis. Angelo Fick, our resident commentator. We continue to get reaction on this story when Afternoon News continues. Stay right where you are.